From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
We're in a weird place. Australians are feeling uncomfortable, unsettled, angry, at times fearful. You know the details, no need to wallow in them. But of course, what does the events that we were covering live on the program last night, a stabbing in a church, a riot that followed after, the mass attack in Bondi, and less profile but equally concerning for communities, which was a brawl that took place in Melbourne. Machetes being used as people were fighting amongst themselves. Australia is in the wrong place. For a long time we've talked about polling that says Australia is headed in the wrong direction, is on the wrong track. And for many people, that of course is about our economic situation. But social cohesion, how we interact with each other, how we disagree with each other, is something that is a problem that has been festering for too long, but it is a problem that has particularly got worse on the watch of this government. Australians need leadership today to say that the behaviours you have just seen are not acceptable, not allowable, not tolerated, not minimised. These are the things that we will not explain away as just a once in an every now thing, or look, the far majority of this. The reality is that there are too many amongst us who are putting something other than the laws of the country above them. There are too many people who are choosing violence over any other course of action. And this is going to be a moment where we will know whether we have the right type of leaders or not. This is being noted by people in the press gallery about the challenge for Anthony Albanese, that of all of the things that any Prime Minister has to face, there are often moments, not of their choosing, but will be their making, in this case as men, of course in the case of Julia Gillard as a woman. Is Albo up to it? Now, you know I would never vote for him. I don't support him. Many of the policies we will vehemently disagree with. But regardless of whether we voted for it or not, whether we like it or not, Anthony Albanese is the leader of our country right now. And just like times when wars that nobody could see coming begin, horrible things happening around the world or here at home, it is how you respond to them that matters. We've seen when leaders get it wrong and they are punished understandably and aggressively by Australians. But too often, there are politicians who are thinking about what the consequences of their response will be as opposed to the need to respond strongly in the moment. Now, I want to show you something that was the Prime Minister sort of saying the right thing today. But for a man who's been a public speaker for as long as he has, a leader in his community, a leader in his party, and then eventually the Prime Minister, you would have thought that he could have spoken with a greater sense of conviction and focus. Does anyone actually believe that Anthony Albanese was conveying a message today that Australia is in the wrong place, that red lines are being crossed every day, and that those red lines will be policed with full effect, not just in the literal sense of the law, but about the spirit of the leadership of the country, to have a sense of right and wrong, to, yes, have an indignation, an anger when someone violates those red lines. This was the Prime Minister today, reading from notes, not speaking from the heart, not having the ticker to look Australia in the eye via the cameras in the room. Instead, this was the sort of person who thinks this is not a moment that needs to be stood up for. This Prime Minister can, like all politicians, summon up the rage when he feels like it. But what does it say that he cannot summon up that rage that we all feel today? He was the Prime Minister. If you had to read his words back to the court, they are fine. But you know the difference between somebody who is saying it with every fibre they've got and somebody who is forced to say it because that's what they have to do.
We are a peace-loving nation. This is a time to unite, not divide as a community and as a country.
Now, despite all of the problems that I have with this Prime Minister, unlike those of the left, I don't automatically assume that those that we disagree with lack a humanity. I have no doubt that this Prime Minister loves his family, loves his community and loves his country. But compare the passionless words that you just saw with the moment that the Prime Minister wanted everyone to see on television. The moment that he was going for today was not that a red line has been crossed, that we will do everything in our power to make sure this does not happen, that we will minimise any chance of this happening again, that we will reinforce to anyone of any faith, any creed, whether they are born here or come here, that there are things that are acceptable and not acceptable, that the behaviours that led to riots and revenge, let alone the attack itself on a holy figure in the community of Western Sydney, of course, is a bloody outrage. Instead, the Prime Minister today was way more focused on trying to get a message up and over the unpleasantness of the moment that we are in because he wanted to jump on a bandwagon. Bollard Man is a French national whose time in this country was running out. But the Prime Minister did what most of us wanted him to do, which was to try to find a way to make this bloke a permanent citizen if he wants to be here. But again, can we just play that first comment again? Now, again, this is a polished performer who knows what he is doing. But he was checking the notes to make sure that he was saying the words that had been agreed to by some committee, as opposed to the leader of a country who is speaking from his heart. One more time. The Prime Minister on Australia being a peace-loving nation.
We are a peace-loving nation. This is a time to unite, not divide as a community and as a country.
But then the made-for-TV moment, the moment where he was jumping on the bandwagon and doing what everyone wanted him to do, which was to play into one of the silver linings images of a terrible time at Bondi. Have a look at the confidence and the lack of notes that he needs to say this about the permanent citizenship for Bollard Man.
With regard to the French citizen, the French national, Damien Guerrero, who people saw such bravery in on Saturday. I say this to Damien Guerrero, who is dealing with his visa applications, that you are welcome here, you are welcome to stay for as long as you like. This is someone who we would welcome becoming an Australian citizen.
Emotion, animation, able to speak up the top of his head, confidence, wanting to deliver a message to the television cameras that would then deliver the message back to our fellow Australians. That's good. But why couldn't he do the same about policing that peaceful nation? Compare that with the alternative Prime Minister. Peter Dutton today had no notes. Instead, he spoke from the heart. He spoke where I believe the majority of Australians want our Prime Minister to be. Now, there is no election in any short term. So could the people around the Prime Minister, as much as they would hate to admit it, take a lesson from the opposition leader? This is what we want to hear, and this is how we want to hear it.
An act of violence in a place of worship is completely unacceptable in our country. It doesn't matter whether you disagree vehemently with a priest or with an imam, with a rabbi, with any person. Violence is never the answer.
Now, while, yes, I repeat, because I'm not going to pretend that I don't have a very obvious and nightly record of criticism of the Prime Minister, just to show that this is a point that can cross party lines. I want to commend the leadership of Chris Minns in New South Wales. He has been relentless in his conversation and condemnation of the hate preachers that exist on the fringes of Western Sydney. He also today decided to call together as many leaders of as many faiths as possible to be in one room. My suggestion to the Prime Minister tomorrow is to do exactly what Chris Minns did, but also get people in their native tongue, as well as in English, to say that they abhor what is alleged to have happened in that church last night, that they abhor hate being spread from the pulpit. They will not accept it. Chris Minns is showing the way. The Prime Minister did exactly the right thing on Sunday in Bondi by standing next to Chris Minns and local leaders by laying a wreath exactly where Australians wanted him to be. But then for the one step forward, he's taken 4 back today. I hope he takes a giant leap towards courage tomorrow. Now, as we were on air last night, we were telling you about the scenario that was playing out inside that church in Western Sydney. We also spent some time focused on the reaction to it. Now, I won't play again for you the image that you all know, which is, of course, the alleged attack. We have to use the word alleged because matters are now moving through the system. This is the quirk of the law. You also know that last night we were flying slightly blind about exactly what was happening outside the church as the alleged stabber was still inside the church. When members of the community that would normally meet in that church knew that he was still inside the church and that they wanted to exact an eye for an eye revenge. Now, this matter has now been ruled to be a terrorist incident. Now, fitting with my normal practice here is that in breaking news, and you know that when we go into breaking news, it'll be about all the data and all the information we can possibly hand you at the time, but I will do my best not to mention the name of people, regardless of the legal consequences. I will not name these people because I want the focus always to be on the victims and to be on the community. I will make an exception in this case to make a point. There was video that was circling on social media last night that was coming towards the end of our broadcast. We made the decision not to broadcast it because we needed to verify it. That process has now taken place, and this was video from inside the church with the alleged attacker and his alleged motivation. Again, that language is used for the most obvious now of legal reasons.
منو دزك هنا؟
بس ليش عم بيسب رسولي ما كنت جيت لهون؟
منو؟
إذا عم بيدخل حلب ديني ما كنت جيت لهون، بس هو عم بيدخل حلب ديني.
هي دين هي دين
إذا هو حكى
هي دين هي دين الشيطان مالتك حبيبي روح على شيطانك شوف شو يسوي عليك.
إذا هو بس حكى عن دينه ما كنت جيت.
And because of those words, because of the reason for the alleged attack and the alleged reason for the attack, the police, once the sun came up, were able to confirm what we couldn't say during the breaking news environment because the police had not declared it at that moment in time. But the police confirmed that this was a terrorist attack.
After consideration of all the material, I declared that it was a terrorist incident.
As was the comments coming from security chiefs in Canberra.
I support New South Wales Police in calling this a terrorist incident, and we believe it is religiously motivated.
And one of the other dimensions that continues to make this febrile environment is a number of people who would like to exact revenge. Exact revenge for the attack on the person of their faith. There were text messages that were doing the rounds today about trying to go after institution and members of the faith of which the alleged attacker is from. The wonderful Dai Lee, who of course is a refugee to this country but has become a leader of her community. So much so that she's moved through local council and now is their local federal MP. We spoke to her again last night during our breaking news coverage. And she has the courage to say what is difficult to say if you don't live in these type of communities, because it's always immediately reduced to some level of racism. Well, this is someone speaking the truth about a fear that exists in parts of Western Sydney.
As a member who've always been proud of our wonderful, diverse community, and that is something that I've constantly stand up and talked about. And I don't want that to be destroyed in any way, because we are a very multi-faith, one of the most multicultural and multi-faith communities in the country. So therefore it's important that we live side by side in peace and harmony.
She talked earlier in the day about the concept of us and them. And that is an uncomfortable feeling, because you have groups where you are the us and the other group is the them, and the them becomes the us, and vice versa. Fee Whelan is one of our excellent reporters here at Sky News. She's in the area right now, I believe in front of the church that we were speaking about with some detail last night. Fee, of course, the concern of police was, again, that the same people that were there demanding eye for an eye would either find another location or there'd be more trouble tonight. Obviously, it looks pretty calm where you are, but that doesn't mean that there's not a simmering tension in the community.
Paul, certainly a very different scene to what you were crossing to last night. You can still see signs of what went down, though. I'm standing next to a car at the moment that has a smashed windscreen, and this is one of many that we've seen like this tonight. Take a look behind me, though. We've got a small group of people gathering, and we're trying to work out what that is, because there was a vigil that had been planned for tonight, but the organisers have been turning people away. They've been saying it's not taking place after all, this is not the right time, and we understand it wasn't an official vigil, it wasn't organised by the church, and it seems the church didn't want a large group of people here. And so we're trying to work out if people have sort of arrived and have been sticking around anyway. A moment ago, someone came and blew out all these candles here. Those candles were lit in preparation for prayers for that vigil, but those have been put out. We have seen the riot squad doing laps of this block, and certainly the place still remains a crime scene. So when you hear the organisers say it's not the right time, you think perhaps that would have something to do with it. They're waiting for this to be cleared up before they pray for the bishop.
When you were putting together and trying to keep an eye on where you needed to be tonight, you know, and again, we're not going to list a whole series of locations because we don't want to add to potential problems here. But the watching brief isn't just that church, is it, in and around the area?
No, it's not. There are many places around the area, but one in particular that was singled out was Liverpool Hospital, where the bishop is recovering after undergoing surgery. We know that the church actually put a note out earlier saying, please don't gather outside the hospital, because they were concerned for people's safety and the bishop's safety. Apparently people were gathering for vigils with good intentions, but there was concern over what that could escalate into. You know, a lot of worry at the moment about any sort of group, and about, as you mentioned, how the mood can change in a group environment. So that was one that police were keeping an eye on. And just finally, again, I don't want to put you in any difficult position or our audience adding to any potential problems. But again, one of the things that authorities have been very definite about today, which is that they are not going to be releasing and not even speculating on the location of the alleged attacker. That's been key to keep that information away, because again, the presumption is that presumably some of the people that were there last night would try to attend at that location. Well, we saw what happened last night. As police said today, it escalated from 50 people gathered here to, the last count they said was up to 500. And we saw how quickly it turned from a gathering into a very angry mob. So, yes, certainly they don't want anyone to know where that teenager is, for fear that people will try to track him down. We heard the Premier today warning against any sort of reprisal attacks, saying we don't want people to go out and take the law into their own hands, and they really just need to trust the police investigation into this.
Well, again, Fee, thank you very much. Welcome to the team. I'm so glad that you're part of it. Apologies that this is the way that we begin our chats here at night. Thank you, mate. All the best. Of course, Fiona Whelan there in front of the church, where, of course, there will be plenty more to come in the next little while. All right, let's talk about cost of living, and one of the most ridiculous things I have seen out of Canberra in a long time. And I, like you, have been watching Canberra for a long time. Now we know that successfully the Prime Minister and the Treasurer were able to slip their way around responsibility for a dozen interest rate rises by trying to blame the former Reserve Bank. And now the cost of living crisis, well, they've tried to blame one group in particular because they are the end of the chain of what you have to pay.
My government is concerned about the price of what consumers pay at Coles and Woolies and other supermarkets. We want to make sure that consumers benefit from cheaper prices which are being paid. We're dead serious. We find it completely unacceptable that when supermarkets are getting goods cheaper, the prices should go down.
So today, of course, there was the inevitable show trial when politicians would wave their fingers and carry on at the CEOs who run the supermarkets. Now, again, are these people beyond criticism? No. Is there some questions from time to time about how any business does its business? You bet. I don't defend them reflexively, but what I absolutely abhor is the behaviour of politicians who have become a little more like American politicians. So that as soon as somebody sits in front of them, then they wave and scream and carry on. And here's some of the questioning that was going back and forth between Nick McKim, who, by the way, isn't just a senator, he's actually the leader of the committee, which means he would have to call himself into order. Instead, he was threatening this garbage.
Why won't you confirm what your ROE was?
Senator, with due respect, we focus on our return on investment.
All right, I know what you focus on. Thank you, Mr Banducci. I know what you focus on.
I've answered the question many times.
You have not answered the question, Mr Banducci.
These
Honestly, I'm not interested in your spin or your bullshit. This is a Senate inquiry. Answer the question.
Senator, I sit here before you very respectfully saying we measure ourselves return on investment.
Very respectfully not answering the question. It is open to the Senate to hold you in contempt, and that carries potential sanctions, including up to 6 months imprisonment for you.
Senator, I've tried to be very specific in saying what we focus on. That is where my focus is.
Well, firstly, empty threat. The contempt isn't about what you say to the committee, it's about whether you turn up to the committee or not. You see, these things, and why I think they are so unproductive, is because it's all about the politicians being able to get their heads on the telly, yelling at the figure who is public enemy number one, and not actually talking about any sort of policy changes or potential law changes or advices to about how they change their business. We saw this, of course, when it came to Qantas, when the righteous indignation that was there amongst Labor senators, and then just a couple of weeks later, they voted not to continue the same inquiry. You're either all in on the outrage or not. Now, what you're starting to see here is the Greens with their numbers and their relationship with the Labor Party, meaning that they are moving to a position where they aren't just members of these committees, they are starting to chair these committees, which mean they're in charge of how these show trials are running. Now, I know that there are those that automatically will say that any level of defence or calling out of the stupidity of the inquiry means that I'm defending somebody who's lining my pockets with thousands, nay, millions of dollars. Well, do you notice them sponsoring this program? No. Again, do I think that every business should be able to be hauled in, called to account, try to explain things? But when we're in that scenario, it's not about understanding. It is literally about a show trial, a nonsense. And the invocation of a potential jail penalty was absolute garbage. Now, of course, that should have been pointed out, that the jailing isn't about what gets said in front of the committee. Instead, it is whether you turn up to the committee or not. But do we expect anything else? Now, interestingly, some other people have similar views to me, including Elizabeth Knight, writing in the Sydney Morning Herald today, where she says that this thing became an Olympic sport. Meantime, in the Australian, quite correctly, They again see this as the silliness and the show trial that it was. It was never intended to be an exercise in information gathering by the Greens senator. And with his other senators sitting idly by, it reflects the attitude of politicians towards business, investing and private capital in Australia is moving towards an economically destructive place. Meantime, interesting to note about what people can't afford to buy in supermarkets anymore. Now, this, you may say, is the very reason why there needs to be the inquiry in the first place. Fine, have the inquiry, but was any of this being discussed by Nick McKim? No. Instead, the peculiarities of the accounting practices and what is and isn't in the annual report. Turnbull Times today. Australians dropping fruit and vegetables from their diet in a cost of living crisis. That wasn't a survey, that was information that came, of course, out of the Australian Bureau of Statistics yesterday. Meantime, petrol. Now, we are on the other side of the public holidays. We're in the middle of school holidays or towards the tail end of them, depending on what type of school and what state you're in. But petrol right now in Sydney is $2.33 per litre. $2 in Melbourne, above $2 in Brisbane. Yet is this government, which claims to be doing everything about cost of living, going to be cutting petrol taxes in the upcoming budget, where, of course, we've gone from 23 cents per litre to now 49 cents per litre, with the expectation of further indexation, which means further increases to come later in the year.
No. There's no way.
No way.
No.
No.
And why? You would say it's because we don't have enough money. The intergenerational report suggested that we would have this year and every year for the next 40 years budget deficits. Oh no. Guess what? Last year they had $20 billion more than even they could spend, yet they did not cut this tax. Yet they did not give people their $1,500 automatic tax return to help them get through the cost of living crisis. And guess what's about to happen again? There's about to be another surplus. So this bloke, who could choose to cut your petrol taxes instead, is trying to go for a surplus, an apparently modest and smaller one than last year. Also, they can go to an election saying, trust us when it comes to the economy. Now, Australians are living in a per capita recession. It means the family, your joint, your house, you are going backwards. The government gets to go forwards because of the tickets that they clip, including on things like petrol, but more importantly, on things like minerals. If they are in any way fair income, and they're not, they would be cutting petrol taxes at the very least. They'd do that tomorrow, and then they'd be promising towards the budget they're putting back the $1,500 that they have taken away from 10 million workers. Which might explain the latest opinion polling which has been popping around right now. Now, we've been following the trends here, be it News poll, be it the Turnbull Times poll, be it the one popping up even in the Morgan poll. Well, have a look at this. According to the Financial Review poll, which is put together by Freshwater, let's start at the bottom left-hand corner. Two-party preferred, 50-50. Now, yes, the Teals and their popularity will be the big test about whether the opposition can get close to forming a minority government, but most likely it is the Labor Party forming a minority government with, among others, people like the Greens. Well, the Labor Party's primary vote's now at 31%. The Liberal National Party, generally speaking, can win an election if they've got a primary at 40. You would have to assume one or two of the Teals may disappear, but the Teals again become the buffer, which is why the Prime Minister can carry on with the arrogance that he currently does. But he doesn't have a backbench of 90 MPs. He's only got 78 seats in the Parliament. They lose 3, they're in minority government. The Greens are going backwards and everything else remains stable. You can see here that Peter Dutton's numbers, they rise, Albo's fall. And in terms of favourable and unfavourable, the Prime Minister has a higher unfavourable rating than Peter Dutton, which is why, of course, blame Dutton, blame Dutton, blame Dutton is the main focus of those who hate him. Also on the issues, now I won't get you to try to read all of this, but you'll be able to see on these issues about where the parties are more favoured by voters, and the majority of them are not with the government. In fact, the issues where people back the government are welfare and payments. Geez, what a surprise after they increased welfare to now 36% of the federal budget, more than anything else. Family, education, training, community, social care and health. Meantime, the opposition, managing the economy, defence and national security, immigration and asylum seekers, crime and social order. That issue has been ticking up and no doubt will go through the roof the next time we have a look at one of these polls. Also, they're leading on cost of living, on tax, on government spending, on housing, on accommodation, and on roads and transport. Oh yeah, and remember how the Prime Minister said the great solution to the Australian democratic experiment should be more time in government for him?
I think that our terms are too short with just 3 years. Our view, long-term policy, and we've put it to the Australian people, is for 4-year terms.
Well, guess what? He can't even crack a majority on that. The man who, of course, loves being able to turn 60-40 into 40-60, well, he'd be pretty much in the same place because we'd have to have a referendum for it. Right now, 38% of people say no. Sorry, 38% say yes, 44% say no. Unsure, 18. You have a referendum, let's split that in half. Clearly, no ends up winning. So his continuous record of always being on the wrong side of where people are, well, it continues even when he's talking about staying in power for even longer. Now, each and every night at midnight Australian Eastern Time, Donald Trump will be in a courtroom, and he'll be in that courtroom for the next 6 weeks. That, of course, is a trial which is all about the accounting practices of the hush money payment that was paid to the adult star Stormy Daniels. Now, what the key allegation here is that Donald Trump moved over $100,000 to his lawyer. The lawyer then hands it on to Stormy Daniels, and it's accounted for in the business as legal fees. Now, this is a practice that is hardly the greatest sin in the accounting world, but of course, misdemeanours are turned into felonies because they want to try to find a way to find him guilty of a felony, because we know what the poll consequences of that are, and in a fever dream of the left, they would hope that he'd start serving jail time before the upcoming election. Well, one of the other things that I thought I should mention here is that you would notice, of course, there's no cameras inside the court, which means the only images that we get is a couple of still images at the start of the day. Then the rest of it is all of the court artists, the people who get out the charcoal and they draw sometimes rather weird pictures of Donald Trump. Well, ABC News in the United States, not the one that you pay for here, went and spoke to some of these court artists about how do you paint the former president in court.
He's got a lot of expression, a lot of unusual things to capture, a likeness of the hair, that crazy hair and the eyebrows. It's very stressful. It's not going to be the first time I've drawn Trump, but every single time that Trump is in a courtroom, everything is different. Because it's such a big trial, there's a tremendous responsibility to show the world something of what, to capture it for the world. It's my gift. I mean, I have to do this for them.
But of course, it's all part of their interpretation, and they've been around him for a long time, so you can pretty much see that every time they draw him, it's a glare and an evil look that seems to be there. But the big news that came out of day one was not much in terms of the courtroom. In fact, they're going through the jury selection process. There's up to 6,000 people who may well be asked whether they can or can't serve on the jury, but apparently Donald Trump got a little bored at one point and nodded off. I would, during the process, but of course it's a rather unimportant part of the process in terms of him sitting there. It's very important about who the jury ends up being, but the process of finding 12 jurors and 6 alternates is apparently going to take the best part of 2 weeks to do, and then we're off into the full 6-week or maybe 8-week trial. But of course, remember, the ultimate stars of all of this is not the former president, it's the journalists talking about the former president, including the one from the New York Times who said, "He looked at me."
I noticed it. He made a pretty specific stare at me. And
a threat to democracy. Quick break, back with more. Plenty to talk about and plenty to debate this evening, including is the Prime Minister up to the challenge of today? Is he able to actually articulate what we need to hear? And the wider conversation about us and them. The us and the them changes, but we'll discuss it all in a moment's time here on Paul Murray Live. Frank Carboni will join us from Fairfield later in the show as well. Thank you to all my mates who, by the way, have been texting me about their local petrol prices that are even higher than the ones that we were showing as the average. Of course, we use all of those different websites that try to tell you what the average is, but some of the ones are way higher, particularly in Sydney, than even the $2.30 that we were talking about. 2 people that would love their petrol tax to be cut. Only one of them has the capacity to actually influence a minister right now, and he's not in the parliament. None other than Stephen Conroy and, of course, the wonderful Nicole Flint, normally on a Sunday, but due to breaking news, we get it tonight. Thank you very much to both of you. All right, so I want to focus in on Di Lee's comment about us and them. And this is a person who is of that community, loves that community, is a refugee to the country, all right? So she's not somebody who's sort of trying to whip something up or white pride it or all that other distractive conversation that takes place if anyone is critical or makes that observation. So from somebody from inside to say that, I think is really damn important. Nicole, I wanted to see the PM step up today. We will not have a chance to choose another PM for a while. And in the same way that the circumstances that, say, Anna Bligh had to respond to when it came to the floods, or John Howard had to when it came to 9/11 or the Bali bombings, there are things that are not of your choosing, but they are insights into how you respond. And I hope that the Prime Minister finds the same confidence that he had about Bollard Man in talking about the red lines that have been crossed and how he and his government will police those lines and play whack-a-mole with the people who, in any way, shape or form, want to screw with the joint we've got.
I think there are two separate issues here, Paul. First of all is the Labor Party's approach to law and order. And you know, it's tempting to call it a discombobulated mess, but that would actually require them to have policies, clear policies and a clear position on being tough on law and order. We're seeing it's a disaster across the board. We have a youth crime crisis. I mean, when you look at the statistics, youth crime in the past years up 6% in Queensland, 49 or something extraordinary percent in the ACT. I think up 14% in Victoria. We've got detainees wandering around the community that Labor can't even pass legislation to deal with. But also, the other side of this, Paul, is that we are not seeing any leadership from the Prime Minister, from the Labor Party, on insisting that everyone within Australia, anyone who wants to live here, is given the privilege of living here, treats every other person in our society with respect, whether they share their values or not, whether they are, you know, the same religion or not, the same background or not. We have completely had a failure of leadership from Labor on insisting that everyone in Australia acts in a respectful, peaceful manner, and if they don't, that there are very serious consequences for them.
Stephen, I mean, you've worked in and around. He's the captain of your team, and I know that you're going to back him in. But where was the outrage? I mean, I've seen him. We can see him fire up. He'll fire up about whether a piece of legislation is going to go through the parliament or not, right? He'll fire up about a reaction to this situation or that situation. Are there birdies in his ear saying, oh, look, if we all just calm it down, then it'll all go away? Well, it won't go away. What has happened, and your response to it should be something so visible that we believe you'll do everything you can so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, look, I mean, there are a couple of different points to make here, Paul. The first is there's a variety of actions that the Prime Minister took. Obviously, with Bondi Junction, he went down there with Chris Minns. He called a national security meeting of Cabinet. He had a Cabinet meeting. Then again, he's had another Cabinet meeting, national security meeting. He's got briefings from the intelligence services. He's been attending various discussions about it. So in terms of actions, he's pulled every single lever that a Prime Minister should. In terms of, there's a time for anger and a time for stridency, and there's a time for mature leadership. And what Albo's been showing in the last 72 hours, because unfortunately we've got to reach back to the weekend, is that he has been wanting to reassure the community. Reassure the community that this isn't the norm, reassure the community that the government is working with our police, our security agencies, and that is the appropriate course of action. But probably the most important contribution goes back a little way when Mike Burgess, the head of our intelligence agencies, a man who is, impeccable in what he has to say. He sometimes upsets people by what he says, but he's a very measured man. And he has been saying for a considerable period of time, the last government as well as this government, that strident language by leadership, by politicians, is not helping solve the problem. And so he has been urging calm in the public discourse. So I think the Prime Minister has been taking the advice of a security agency head that a strident, angry response is not helpful for the current circumstance.
Sure, and I understand that you can't go full
criticism
Catherine
is a little
Whelan.
unfair.
And I get it, right? The levels of responsibility of those of us outside versus those inside, I understand, right? But again, Nicole, it's to me, you could see where the confidence and the ad-libbing and all the rest of it came from today, and it was about the moment about Bollard, man. It wasn't about we are a peaceful nation, this is not something we're allowed to do. Instead, Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, I think actually showed the measure here, which is, okay, now he's not Catherine Whelan, he's not carrying on. However, he's called in every leader of as many faiths as possible, all to stand there, give him information, to send the message back into the community about that togetherness. I want to see, and I've said this for 20 years, about issues to do with faith and the complexities of it, that I would love to see powerful people, important figures from the communities that need to receive the message, standing next to the Premier, next to the Prime Minister, speaking in a tongue and a tone that everyone will understand, because that's the best any leader can do. I mean, if anyone is hell-bent on breaking the law, they will break the law. But to show the line that unacceptable, we condemn, and everyone calm down, is the better way to play. Don't you reckon, Nicole?
Yes, Paul, totally agree with you, and it would be wonderful if we had our political leaders inviting, as you've said, faith-based leaders to stand with them and help deliver, and then go into communities where problems are arising and help to calm the situations down. But again, on the Prime Minister, Paul, it's only a couple of weeks ago, and I wrote a column about this, on his pathetic response to the drug issues in the AFL. Again, just a complete lack of leadership. So I don't agree with Stephen. Sure, yes, restraint, but we also want to see strong leadership, because Australians, as you've just mentioned, it's coming out in the polling, have had enough of feeling unsafe, and the Prime Minister is doing very little to address that.
Now, as I mentioned in the polls, Stephen, of course, fellow data nerd like myself, the trend is also is not just over time, but it's also across the series of polls. We now have everything from Newspoll, Morgan, Freshwater, Turnbull Times, Essential, all the rest of it, right, that is showing that whatever was achieved in the first couple of months is all now returning to where it was towards the end of last year. Now, does this not speak to what you and I spoke about at the time, which was a finding from those polls that whatever supposed benefits of, in my view, too little too late tax cuts, the majority of Australians didn't know. They weren't coming in till July the 1st. So there was a lovely sort of fit of political this, that and the other when it came to Dunkley. But the reality is, anyone who thinks the government is wildly in a better place than they were at the end of last year, they're not really looking, are they?
No, look, I think all of the polls, no matter who's commissioned them, what you think of them, are all roughly settling into the same core Labor-Liberal primary vote. So Labor's probably between 31, 33, Liberal coalition between 37 and 40. I would think Labor will be disappointed by that. I think Labor's very focused on the budget, and I think you'll see a range of measures on, cost of living. You'll see a budget surplus. I think that's no secret. I've broken Jim's heart again by mentioning it in public, but I think there'll be a second budget surplus, which is at a macroeconomic level, is a positive. We'll see pressure taken off inflation because of that, and I think the Australian economy is a little sluggish still, though. So I'm not forecasting some boom that's coming for the government, but I think the economic tailwinds will be behind the government going into the second half of the year off the back of the budget. Yeah. They've got to continue to sell their message. Yeah, They've got to continue to demonstrate that they're managing the economy. But, you'd have to say Labor should be concerned that their primary vote is in that low 30s.
Now, I'm taking time away from Frank Carboni, so I apologise, mate. But Nicole, if they post a surplus but don't cut petrol tax and your petrol is $2.33 a litre, I can see what the political impact will be the day after the budget.
Yeah, precisely. And cost of living, I sincerely hope for the good of the Australian people that Stephen Conroy is right and that cost of living goes down. But I just cannot see how that's going to happen under this Albanese Labor government. People are hurting, you know, migration is hurting them, housing is hurting them, detainees running riot in the community is worrying them, and they're concerned about law and order. So I just cannot see. Labor has not shifted the dial on this in the past 6 to 12 months, and I don't think that they will.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Got Frank Carbone standing by, so we'll get into that in a moment's time, about how to hold the community together in Fairfield. He knows how to do it as a local and as a mayor. How do we make sure that there is not a response to what we were talking about live last night? Frank Carbone is a good man. He is of Fairfield, he is Fairfield, and he is their mayor. He joins us now. Of course, all of this playing out in the past 24 hours. Frank, the great fear is that something else happens. Maybe not today, but maybe in a couple of days. How do we make sure that, just as fired up as some people may get, that nothing else happens apart from what we saw last night?
Yeah, hi, Paul. Look, it's been a trying time, I think, for the community out here in Western Sydney, and really for all the community, no matter where people live, to have what happened in Bondi, and now to see what's happening in Fairfield, where we've had somebody come from outside and go to a local church and actually try and kill the local bishop. It is obviously horrendous. So what we really need to do, we need everyone to speak the same language, we need everyone to go the same way, and we need everyone to unite. What we want is a community to actually come together. And I know that tonight there's actually been some prayers at the location. There's a lot of calm. There's no incidents happening. And we really need to bring people together, no matter what people's faith or backgrounds are. And I know that there's been a really strong effort to do that. Today, we actually had a meeting with Chris Minns, and actually the police provided us a briefing as well. And I think it's all about tackling these difficult times. And we know that we're going through some serious youth crime issues. And here we have a 16-year-old that has actually attempted to do this to kill a local priest, a local bishop, I should say. Apologies.
Well, I was just going to say, I have to jump in and say the alleged's in all of this for obvious reasons, because it's moving through the process.
Yeah,
that's taking care of you, me at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you have a plan or a way to do what happened today with Chris Minns, which I liked seeing? I liked seeing a meeting with you, police, and also those faith leaders. Can you get the key faith leaders into a room at the council chambers, at a park, whatever, to a place where the message that's going to be said from the pulpit or any other place of which, whatever the equivalent of a sermon is the same message, which is, okay, calm down?
Yeah, we've had all the faith leaders actually come out today and actually condemn the attack, and everybody wants peace. Nobody wants anything to go wrong and for us to have issues. And during that meeting with Chris Minns today, with the Premier, and also New South Wales Police, there was a lot of different actions that were discussed in relation especially to tackling youth crime and the youth issues, because what we found is that when this incident happened, there was a lot of youth at the church. So it's about engaging with people and talking with people, and we will definitely try to bring people together from many different sides. But we shouldn't lose sight that this is one individual that has done this. We shouldn't be saying that this is one religion versus another, because I don't think it is. I think it's one individual that has done this, and it's really unfortunate. And I think definitely, I think we can learn from this and use this as a way forward to actually make things better going forward. And that is, let's bring everyone together. Let's have a discussion about it. We don't want a repeat of this anywhere, not only in Fairfield, but anywhere in this country, because ultimately we need to be united, not divided, because people come here for a better life. People don't come here to actually bring across the challenges that they have overseas. Many people that are persecuted come here to move forward, to have a better life, to give their families a better opportunity, and nobody wants to bring terrorism into this country.
Absolutely, Frank. Strength to your arm, strength and love to your community. Thank you very much, mate. You're the best. You're the best mayor, I think, in the country. None other than Frank Carbone, the mayor of Fairfield. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Late debate, less than 5 minutes away. All right, we're done for tonight. We know you missed them last night. The late debate in a moment or two's time, but I just simply have to say this. Happy birthday to one of my best mates, Drew. Never give up. See you tomorrow.